Hi, I'm Matthew Weinstock, Senior Editor for Hospitals and Health Networks, reporting to you from Phoenix, Arizona, site of the 25th Annual Rural Healthcare Leadership Conference. As we know, there's a growing trend in healthcare for hospitals to employ their physicians, but oftentimes that can come without a broad strategy or even a vision for what that employment model should look like, and it can create a tension between the employed doctors and the independent physicians. I'm joined today by author Dr. Joseph Buchek, who's going to talk about the challenge created by that tension. So Joe, thanks for joining me this afternoon. As we see the physician employment model really growing in healthcare, what are your thoughts about whether hospital executives have a strategic plan or vision for what they want to do with this growth of physician employment?
This whole issue, I think, in large measure has been a wasted opportunity for lack of vision. I think in most organizations, the approach to physician employment has been reactive and defensive as opposed to proactive and a creative effort at trying to pursue a vision that is inspiring for those that would seek to join. So what I find is, and it's understandable that the source of capital, which is what the physician seeks for economic security, that the source of capital, which in most communities is the hospital, tends to see physicians as fungible. That a doctor is a doctor, and the more doctors, the better. And doctors fill beds and fill operating rooms and order ancillary services, and there's no sort of discernment goes on about who to hire and why to hire. And so from the physician's perspective, it's, I want economic security, thank you very much, now stay out of my face. And there's no established quid pro quo. What is it that we're trying to sort of fashion here? And I think that absent creative tension, which demands vision, the default is to self-interest. And I find that in many sort of employed physician groups, the employed doctors don't even know who else is in the group, not even by name, let alone know what it is that they're supposed to unite in pursuit of. And so I find that that really is problematic in our industry and a real wasted opportunity.
And so should the CEO or CMO or who should be trying to create this vision or strategic plan?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. You know, my view is that if you look around at other industries, the source of capital is the source of the vision. And in healthcare then, ideally, it probably should come from governance. It ought to come from the board, because the board, at least in perpetuity, remains in the community, whereas if it's authored literally by the CEO, that CEO may move on in 2 or 3 years, and then you wonder who's left to sort of tend the home fires. But I do think that it relates to the source of capital, and that vision is something that needs to allow potential employed physicians to appreciate whether this is a good match. It's analogous to sort of courting and marrying, you know. I mean, what is it that we want to achieve? And is that something that I find serves my self-interest? And when there's a match between the vision and individual self-interest, there's the capacity to come together around shared purpose, which I think is essential.
Okay. And obviously not every doctor is going to want to be employed, so talk to me a little bit about the tension that's created when you're employing a growing number of physicians, but you still have a base of physicians who are independent, and the tension between those two groups.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Matt. You know, the issue is, I think, that there are political consequences to playing favorites for the hospital, for the CEO. And so there's this grand vision, especially reinforced by the sense that doctors are fungible, that we want everybody to play. The marketplace is just driving the employment model, primarily because physicians coming out of fellowship or out of residency training don't want to be part of the independent practice of medicine. They want economic security. They have significant debt from their educational experience. And so in the model then that gets generated, the employment group grows and the independents become progressively more threatened by thoughts that as the group grows, the referrals will become self-contained in pursuit of the identified business model or contracting initiatives or whatever, and so they become progressively more threatened, and it creates a great deal of tension in the medical community. You know, there's the adoption of the notion of clinical integration as a way of allowing employed physicians and independent physicians to continue to work in harmony together, and in my view it doesn't work. It doesn't work for the reasons of the progressive paranoia that follows the growth of the employed physician group. You can create contracting relationships, and you can provide data, and you can hold independent physicians accountable to perform according to contracted arrangements. But here it might be worth looking at the variant ways in which people respond to expectations, from a continuum of non-compliant to grudgingly compliant to compliant to engaged to committed. And in my view, what you want in the employed group are people who are engaged or committed. What you find in the independents and in a lot of the unselected employed physician group are people who are compliant or grudgingly compliant. And the reality is people who are compliant or less so are sort of willing to conform when there is oversight, external oversight. Remove the external oversight, then they revert to historical behaviors. Whereas people engaged and committed are intrinsically motivated to pursue the objectives that the group holds in common. And I think that represents what ought to be the focal point of who you employ, that there ought to be alignment of their interests and the group's interests, and that those who choose only to be compliant or even, unfortunately, grudgingly or non-compliant are folks that will self-select out on a contracted model, but are not individuals that I would want to invite in to become participative in the group, because the group will migrate towards the mean, and the best performers don't want to be associated with mediocrity.
Well, Joe, I appreciate you taking some time with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to be with you, Matthew. Thank you.
And I'm Matthew Weinstock, reporting live from the 25th Annual Rural Healthcare Leadership Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. Thanks for joining us.